My name's Jack Turner, and the last words my wife tossed over her shoulder that Friday night still cut like glass. She leaned on the counter, heels tapping, lipstick fresh, and grinned like betrayal was a punchline. I need to find out if big size really matters. You'll never know. Don't worry. I didn't slam the door. I didn't raise my voice. I just let the silence swallow her smirk and answered one word. Okay. She thought she'd humiliated me. But 7 years of mortgage, loyalty, and a steady paycheck taught me one thing. Real strength doesn't shout, it waits. So while she walked out convinced I was small, by sunrise she'd discover how big consequences can get when a man stops playing nice. My name's Jack Turner. I'm 42 years old, born and raised in Texas, and for the last 15 years I've been a warehouse supervisor on the south side of Dallas. The kind of job nobody brags about but everybody depends on. Moving freight, managing crews, making sure deliveries hit the road on time. My hands are scarred from pallets, my back stiff from forklifts, but the paycheck was steady, and steady was enough for me. I've always believed a man proves himself by showing up, day after day, clock in, grind, clock out, bring the check home, keep the lights on. It's not glamorous, but it's honest. That's who I am. I wasn't built for shortcuts or shiny distractions. I was built to provide, to put food on the table, to carry weight without complaining. For 7 years of marriage, I thought that was enough for Emily too. Turns out, loyalty doesn't glitter the way temptation does. Emily and I had been married 7 years. Long enough for routines to carve deep grooves, the kind you don't notice until the wheel slips. To anyone looking in, we seemed steady. She had the smile that could light up a room, always laughing at cookouts, always polished when we walked into church on Sundays. Neighbors waved at us like we were the model couple. Our house wasn't fancy, just a 2-story brick on a quiet street outside Dallas, but it carried our story in every corner. The dent in the hallway where we'd moved the couch too fast, the pictures from road trips taped on the fridge, the squeaky step she always skipped in the morning. To me, those little things were proof of a life worth building. She laughed easy, touched my arm when we passed in the kitchen, called me her rock. And I believed it, believed that smile, that warmth, was ours alone. Most days followed the same rhythm. I'd be up before sunrise, black coffee in a chipped mug, out the door before the neighborhood even stirred. By 6, I was in the warehouse, boots echoing on concrete, running crews through orders until the Texas heat bled through the metal walls. 12, sometimes 14 hours later, I'd drive home with the smell of diesel still clinging to my clothes. Emily's evenings looked different. She worked her 9 to 5 at the office downtown, then had what she called her girls' nights. Drinks, laughter, wine bars I'd never stepped foot in. I never questioned it. I figured she needed the balance, some fun while I carried the grind. I'd crack a beer in the garage, watch the game, and wait for her headlights to sweep across the driveway. It was our routine, simple, predictable. At least that's what I thought. What I didn't see then was how those nights out were carving a fracture I was too tired to notice. That night, after she dropped the line about big size, I told myself it was nothing. A bad joke, careless words after a glass of wine. But it stuck. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan turning lazy circles, replaying her voice on a loop. The grin, the lipstick, the way she tossed it like it was harmless. I'd heard plenty of crude jokes at the warehouse, but never in my own kitchen, never from the woman I'd promised my life to. And the part that cut deepest wasn't the words themselves. It was the way she watched me after saying them, testing me, waiting for a crack, for me to prove her right by exploding. But I didn't. I just said, okay. And in that silence, she thought she'd gotten away clean. Still, the more I tried to brush it off, the heavier it pressed. By morning, her voice wasn't just a memory, it was a warning. I tried to chase sleep, but my mind kept drifting back to the early days, when trust wasn't a question, but a given. Back then, Emily and I didn't have much, just an old pickup, a rented apartment with thin walls, and a mattress that sat right on the floor. But we had laughter that filled every corner. I can still see her in faded jeans and a college sweatshirt, barefoot in the kitchen, dancing to songs from a beat-up radio. She used to look at me like I was the whole world, like my rough hands and tired eyes were something worth holding on to. We built our life piece by piece. Our first mortgage, the new washer we couldn't really afford, the long nights planning trips we swore we'd take. I believed every smile, every "I love you," as if they were unshakable truths. And maybe that's why her words cut so deep now. They didn't just wound me, they made me question everything I thought was real. A week later, I caught the first flicker of something I couldn't ignore. I'd just walked in from a 14-hour shift, boots heavy with dust, shoulders stiff from the forklift. Emily was on the couch, phone in hand, grinning at the screen like a schoolgirl. Not the polite smile she gave coworkers, not the laugh she shared with me at old sitcom reruns. This was different, private, alive in a way that stung. When she noticed me, the screen went dark in a blur, her thumb moving faster than I'd ever seen. She set the phone face down on the armrest, too casual, like it had burned her fingers. I asked what was so funny. She shrugged, said it was just Sam sending memes. Her voice was light, but her eyes didn't match. It should have ended there, but the image lingered. That smile meant for someone else. Small detail, maybe. But in marriage, small cracks are where floods begin. It used to be once a month, maybe twice if one of her friends had a birthday. Girls' night was harmless enough. Wine, laughter, the kind of escape I figured every woman needed now and then. But after that night in the kitchen, I started noticing how often the phrase rolled off her tongue. Once a month turned into every other week. Then it was every Friday, sometimes Tuesdays too. Always with the same script, a quick kiss at the door, perfume strong enough to linger long after her taillights disappeared, and that little smile she thought I wouldn't notice. I told myself not to overthink it. I was tired, she was social, maybe I was just jealous of a life outside the warehouse grind. But the pattern was undeniable. Girls' nights weren't occasional anymore. They were routine. And routines, I knew better than anyone, don't change without a reason. And my gut told me her reason wasn't friendship. Emily always had a circle around her, and two names came up the most: Sam Collins and Rachel Miller. Sam was her closest friend, a loud, fast-talking woman from her office who never went anywhere without a glass of wine in her hand. Rachel was quieter, the type to post polished pictures on Instagram about self-care and girls supporting girls. Whenever Emily mentioned a night out, one of those names was attached. Sam needs to vent. Rachel had a rough week. Always an excuse that sounded reasonable on the surface. I'd seen Sam at barbecues. She laughed too loud, called me old man, even though she's only a few years younger. Rachel I barely knew, but she carried herself like she was always watching, cataloging. Maybe they were just friends, maybe not. But every time Emily said girls' night, those names felt less like company and more like cover, and that cover was starting to wear thin. At first I told myself it was nothing, just Emily needing her space, her friends, her laughter outside these walls. But the more I paid attention, the more the pieces refused to fit. The late nights that stretched later, the perfume that lingered stronger, the way she came home flushed, not from wine but from something I couldn't name. I'd built a life on trust. Trust in my crew to move freight, trust in my paycheck to land every Friday, trust in Emily to keep our marriage steady. But now, every time her phone buzzed face down on the counter, every time she smiled at a message and locked the screen too fast, that trust eroded. It wasn't paranoia, it was pattern. A shift in rhythm you can't unhear once you notice it. And standing there in the quiet of our kitchen, I felt the truth pressing at the edges. I wasn't imagining this. Something was happening, and she wanted me blind. It happened on a Tuesday night. Emily rushed out the door, heels clattering, perfume cloud trailing in her wake. The slam of her car door had barely faded when I spotted it, the one thing she never left behind, her phone, sitting on the kitchen counter like a loaded gun. For years I never touched it. That was trust, right? But trust felt like a joke now, and the glow of that screen was daring me. My hands shook as I picked it up, not from guilt, but from the weight of what I knew I'd find. No password change, no lock I couldn't get past, just a trail of messages waiting. My stomach tightened as I stared at the screen lighting up in my palm. In that moment, I knew crossing this line meant no way back. But the line was gone already. She'd erased it herself the night she taunted me, so I opened her phone. And what I saw confirmed everything. The screen opened to a thread lit up in bold. I tapped it, and there it was. Confirmation dressed in neon letters. Can't wait for tonight. He'll never know. LOL. Bigger is always better. The words hit harder than any punch I'd ever taken. My chest locked, my throat dried, and yet, I kept reading. Line after line, emojis that weren't meant for me, laughter spilling across the screen that I hadn't heard in months. Every keystroke was a blade. I could picture her sending them, smirk on her lips, that same smug tilt of her head I'd seen in our kitchen. And the worst part? She wasn't hiding it. She wanted him to know. She wanted me to be small. But I didn't throw the phone. I didn't scream. I did what I always do in a warehouse crisis. I logged it, filed it away. Screenshots. Forward to my private email. Evidence, ammunition. This wasn't heartbreak anymore. It was war prep. At first, the pain was white hot, like someone had pressed a brand straight into my chest. My hands shook, vision blurred, breath coming in short, sharp gasps. For a moment, I thought I might pass out right there on the kitchen floor. 7 years together, and this was the truth she handed me. A joke at my expense, a spectacle behind my back. But heat doesn't last. It cools. It calcifies. The burn in my chest hardened into something sharper, steadier. I wiped my eyes, sat down at the table, and stared at the glow of her messages until the sting dulled into steel. That was the shift. No more bargaining, no more hoping. Pain gave me something better. Clarity. She thought she was humiliating me. She thought she was untouchable, clever. But I wasn't broken. I was awake. And an awake man with nothing left to lose doesn't scream. He plans. I leaned back in the chair, the phone heavy in my hand, and made my next move. Screenshot, tap, screenshot again. Every line, every emoji, every timestamp, cataloged. I forwarded the files to my private email, one she didn't know existed. Years of warehouse work had taught me one rule. If it isn't written down, it doesn't exist. And this was my paper trail. The more I saved, the calmer I became. It was like loading freight, box by box, stacked neat, secured tight. She thought she'd hidden her nights in shadows, but now I had them under fluorescent light. I created a folder on my laptop and named it something simple. Project Evidence. Inside, the truth piled up. Not just her words, but her intent. She wanted to laugh behind my back, to test me, to shrink me. Fine. She handed me the rope. All I had to do was decide how and when to pull it tight. On my laptop, I opened a blank folder and gave it a name that felt clinical, detached. Project Evidence. No frills, no flourish, just a container to hold the truth she thought I'd never see. I dropped in the screenshots first, each file stamped with the date, the time, her careless words. One by one, the folder filled like a ledger written in betrayal. I wasn't panicked anymore. I was organized. Each image was a nail, each timestamp a hammer strike. Together they built something stronger than anger. Proof. In the warehouse, I'd learned that structure keeps chaos from swallowing you. Pallets stacked right don't fall. Numbers logged don't lie. And here, with every file I saved, I felt the same stability return. Emily thought she was clever, thought she could play reckless and leave me blind. But the truth was lining up, neat and sharp. And once the structure was finished, it would be strong enough to bury her illusions whole. A week later, the next piece fell into my lap. Emily tossed her purse onto the counter before rushing upstairs to change. While she showered, a folded slip slid halfway out of her wallet, cheap thermal paper, edges crumpled. I recognized it before I even picked it up. A motel receipt. Not a hotel downtown where she'd stayed for work trips in the past. No, this was a roadside spot off the interstate, the kind truckers use for a few hours sleep between runs. Date, time, room number, all right there in faded ink. And the timestamp matched perfectly with a girls' night she'd sworn lasted until midnight. I slid it back exactly where I found it, careful not to crease a thing. Then I wrote down the details, logged them into Project Evidence. Screenshots were damning, but paper was permanent. That receipt wasn't just proof of where she'd been, it was proof of who she really was when she thought no one was watching. Evidence on paper was solid, but I wanted more. Something alive, something that couldn't be brushed off as coincidence. So one Saturday, while Emily was inside curling her hair for yet another girls' night, I walked out to the driveway with a small black box no bigger than a deck of cards. A GPS tracker. Bought it in cash, no receipts, no trail back to me. I crouched beside her sedan, the summer heat radiating off the concrete, and slid the device into place beneath the rear bumper. Magnetic lock, invisible unless you knew where to look. In less than a minute, it was done. Back inside, I synced it to my phone. A map blinked to life, a dot marking her car like a target on a radar screen. That night, when her taillights faded down our street, I didn't wait up in the dark like before. I sat at the table, watching the dot move, and when it stopped, right at that same roadside motel, I knew my silence was paying off. Once the tracker was in place, the pattern started to write itself. I treated it like a shift log at the warehouse. Dates, times, destinations. Tuesday. She left the house at 7:42 p.m., car parked at the motel by 8:17, didn't move again until 11:56. Friday. Same routine. Out the door smiling, back home past midnight, perfume and excuses clinging like smoke. I kept a notebook in the garage, grease-stained cover, each page a ledger of betrayal, headings in black ink, departure, arrival, duration. I cross-referenced with screenshots, with receipts, with every flimsy excuse she tossed my way. Each entry tightened the noose. The more I wrote, the calmer I became. This wasn't paranoia anymore. It was evidence, structured and undeniable. She thought her nights disappeared into the dark, but I had her pinned under fluorescent light, cataloged down to the minute. And as the pages filled, so did my resolve. She wanted to play games. I was building the scoreboard. Patterns were strong, but I wanted a voice outside my own to nail it down. So one afternoon, I pulled the crumpled receipt from my notes and dialed the number at the top. A man answered, voice weary, radio humming faintly in the background. Lakeshore Motel, this is Carl. I kept it casual, like a guy double-checking a bill. Hey, I think my card might have been charged by mistake. Room 214 last Tuesday? Papers shuffled on his end, a pause. Then, yeah, checked in at 8:15, checked out just before midnight. Female, mid-30s, brunette, signed in under the name Emily Turner. Hearing it from him was like the final nail driven straight. No room for doubt, no way to tell myself I was imagining things. I thanked him, hung up, and wrote it down in the ledger. Screenshots, receipts, timelines, and now a witness. Piece by piece, her lies were no longer hers. They were mine to keep. When I hung up with Carl, I sat in the garage staring at the ledger spread open on the workbench. The evidence was there, enough to confront her, to explode, to demand answers I already knew. But explosions burn hot and fast. They leave smoke, ashes, nothing to stand on. Silence, though. Silence lingers. It unsettles. It builds pressure until the walls give way. So I kept my mouth shut. I smiled when she left for her girls' nights, kissed her cheek when she walked back through the door. I let her believe I was blind, small, a man too tired from 12-hour shifts to notice her perfume was borrowed from someone else's skin. Meanwhile, my folder grew heavier. Screenshots, receipts, GPS logs, dates, times. Each night she thought she was winning, I was stacking another brick into the wall that would one day collapse on her. I wasn't after a fight. I was after a finish. One evening, after she'd left with her heels clicking down the driveway, I opened my laptop and logged into our joint bank account. I wasn't looking for proof. I already had plenty. I was looking for patterns. They weren't hard to find. Charges that didn't match our life. $200 at a boutique wine bar I'd never stepped foot in. Room charges from hotels we'd never booked for vacations. A recurring debit at a lingerie store Emily hadn't mentioned in years. The numbers told a story, and it wasn't one she could spin away with a smile. I printed the statements and slid them into the project evidence folder, page after page of her secret life written in ink and decimals. In the warehouse, inventory never lies, and neither do bank records. She thought she was clever, hiding behind late nights and perfume. But the money always tells the truth, and this truth was stacking higher than she realized. One Thursday she came home late, slipping her heels off at the door with a sigh. Long night at the office, overtime again, she said, rubbing her temples like stress was a mask she could put on and take off. I nodded, set my beer down, and asked nothing. That was what she expected. Silence, trust, the steady husband who wouldn't pry. But her car's tracker had already told me the truth. She hadn't been at her downtown office. She'd been parked outside the Lakeshore Motel for 3 hours, engine cold, headlights dark. The timestamp matched perfectly with the debit card charge I'd printed that morning. She poured herself a glass of wine, sat on the couch, and scrolled through her phone with a smile just sharp enough to test me. I watched her from the kitchen doorway, steady and calm. Overtime wasn't measured in hours that night. It was measured in lies, and I was logging every one. Saturday morning, Emily asked me to grab her sunglasses from the car while she showered. I opened the driver's door, and the smell hit me before I even sat down. Not her perfume, not the faint vanilla air freshener she always clipped to the vent. This was heavy, sharp, sandalwood with something darker underneath. A man's cologne, the kind that doesn't fade easily. It clung to the fabric seats, soaked into the steering wheel. I'd spent enough years loading trucks with guys doused in drugstore sprays to know the difference. This wasn't mine, and it wasn't hers. I sat there a long minute, breathing it in, letting the weight of it settle. It wasn't just a scent. It was a presence. Proof that while I was breaking my back on the warehouse floor, another man had been sitting right here, close enough for his cologne to tattoo itself into the upholstery. And Emily thought a lie about overtime could cover that? Not anymore. That cologne stayed in my lungs the rest of the day, and it dragged me backward, to a memory I hadn't visited in years. Our wedding. Hot July sun, cheap folding chairs lined up in rows, my brother sweating through his shirt as best man. Emily walked down the aisle in a dress we couldn't afford, but she glowed like she owned the world. I remember my hands shaking when I slid the ring onto her finger, the way she whispered, "We'll make it, no matter what." Back then, I believed her smile was the purest truth I'd ever know. I believed her vows were ironclad, stronger than anything life could throw at us. Now here I was, sitting in her car, breathing in another man's cologne, staring at a life that looked nothing like the one we promised each other. The distance between that July afternoon and this moment felt wider than any aisle. By Sunday, the digital files weren't enough. Screenshots sat in my inbox, receipts stacked in a folder, GPS logs blinking on my phone. But I wanted to see it all at once, laid out like freight lined up on the dock. So I cleared the pegboard wall in the garage, the one where I usually kept wrenches and socket sets, and replaced tools with paper. I printed every screenshot, every bank statement, every motel receipt, page after page, taped under fluorescent light. The lies took shape. A message here, a timestamp there, a charge that matched a night out. One by one, I pinned them in rows, lines drawn between them with a black marker. Standing back, I didn't just see scraps of betrayal anymore. I saw a system, a pattern as clear as any shipping manifest. Emily thought she was clever, darting between shadows. But now her entire secret life was pinned in plain sight, framed on my garage wall like an exhibit. I stood in front of that board, pages fluttering slightly in the draft from the garage door, and let the weight of it wash over me. Every instinct in me wanted to rip it down, storm inside, throw the proof in her face, and watch the color drain. That's what anger demanded. Loud, messy, short-lived. But another voice, lower, steadier, spoke louder in its quiet. Anger screams, revenge whispers. I repeated it under my breath like a mantra. Screaming would give her a fight she could twist, a scene she could spin as Jack lost control. But whispers, planning, patience, silence, those built a trap no one could wriggle out of. So I clipped another receipt to the board and stepped back. The wall wasn't chaos anymore. It was a blueprint. And I realized then that my power didn't come from the noise I could make. It came from the silence I chose to keep. I learned a long time ago that a man's temper can cost him more than his mistakes. In the warehouse, you blow up at the wrong guy, you lose respect. You panic under pressure, someone gets hurt. So I carried that discipline home. Every night when Emily walked through the door smelling like wine and shadows, I trained my face into stone. I laughed at the right times, nodded when she told half-truths, poured her a glass like nothing was wrong. My silence wasn't weakness, it was rehearsal. Every calm answer, every steady glance was another brick in the wall she never saw me building. Inside, the storm raged. But outside, I was granite. She looked at me and saw a man too dull, too small to notice. That was the trick. She mistook restraint for blindness. And in that miscalculation, She gave me space to prepare the ending she'd never see coming. Up until then, the affair was faceless, just shadows and messages, receipts, and late nights. But shadows always slip, and hers did in the simplest way. I was combing through her email one night while she slept, careful not to shift the mattress. Buried in a folder she thought I'd never check was a motel confirmation, forwarded automatically from her personal account. The name on the reservation stung worse than the rest. Ryan Mitchell. I knew that name. He wasn't some stranger. Ryan had shown up once at a company picnic, sales rep from a partner firm, the type who bragged about commissions while shaking your hand too long. I remembered his cologne now, the same heavy sandalwood that lingered in her car. Seeing it in black and white took the air out of the room. Betrayal had a face, a voice, a smirk. It wasn't abstract anymore. It was Ryan Mitchell. And with a name, my case wasn't just personal. It was surgical. The screenshots, the receipts, the motel logs, those were enough to convince a judge. But the night I opened her gallery, scrolling past birthday pictures and selfies, I found the proof that pierced deeper than all the rest. A photo. It wasn't staged or posed. It was sloppy, taken in low motel light. Emily leaned against Ryan, her hair tangled, his arm draped around her waist like he'd owned it forever. She wasn't laughing politely or forcing a smile. She looked alive in a way I hadn't seen in years. Too alive. I stared at that picture until my knuckles went white around the phone. There it was. The intimacy she swore was mine alone, captured and frozen in pixels. I saved it, printed it, pinned it dead center on the garage board, the crown jewel of betrayal. Now her secret wasn't just words or numbers. It had a face, a body, a moment, and that moment would destroy her. By the time I pinned that photo to the board, I knew I wasn't just gathering scraps. I was building a case. And cases don't win on anger. They win on law. So I made a call. Not to a buddy, not to family. To an attorney whose number I'd pulled from a quiet Google search. Divorce, Dallas, discreet. We met in a coffee shop across town, the kind of place nobody from my neighborhood would stumble into. I slid a manila envelope across the table, thick with screenshots, receipts, logs, and that photograph. She leafed through it without a word, her brow tightening with each page. Finally, she closed the folder, looked me in the eye, and said, "You've got more than enough. She won't walk away with a dime." Walking out, I felt lighter. Not healed. No, the wound still burned, but armed. For the first time, I wasn't just a husband holding pain. I was a man holding leverage. The lawyer's words echoed all the way home. She won't walk away with a dime. That became my compass. Step one was simple. Cut off her access. Love might have blinded me, but numbers never would. I opened a new checking account in my name only, rerouted my paycheck with a quiet phone call to HR. The joint account, the one Emily thought was untouchable, would start running dry without her even noticing. I ordered new cards, canceled the old ones with the excuse of suspicious activity. The bank clerk didn't ask questions. Bills, mortgage, utilities. I shifted them all onto my new account, neat and steady, like pallets stacked against the dock. Within a week, I knew every dollar that moved was mine alone. She could still play dress-up, still sip wine with Ryan under motel lights, but the floor beneath her was already giving way. She thought the game was hers. Truth was, I'd just taken the board. Friday came, and with it, payday. For 7 years, Emily had grown used to seeing that deposit hit our joint account like clockwork. Steady, dependable, invisible proof of the hours I broke my back for. But this time, nothing. Because I'd already moved it. My paycheck slid clean into the new account, mine alone, silent as a whisper. That weekend, she pulled out her card at the grocery store, all confidence and red lipstick, and I watched from the next aisle as the clerk shook his head. Declined. She laughed it off, said she must have grabbed the wrong card, but I caught the flicker in her eyes, confusion laced with fear. She came home later, waving the card like it had betrayed her. "Can you call the bank? Something's wrong." I nodded, calm, steady. "I'll handle it." And I did handle it. Not with anger, not with yelling, just silence. The kind that lets her world unravel one frayed thread at a time. A few days later, Emily tried again. This time at a boutique downtown, the kind of place that sold $100 candles and silk dresses tagged imported. She strutted in like she owned the world, swiped her card at the counter, and froze. Declined. Tried again. Same result. The clerk gave her that polite but sharp smile, the kind that says you don't belong here. Emily flushed, grabbed her phone, and called me before she even left the store. "Jack, something's wrong with the card. It keeps getting declined." I kept my voice flat, steady, the way I would if a forklift broke down mid-shift. "I'll look into it." That was all. No panic, no promises, just calm. What she didn't know was that her world was shrinking by the day. Every swipe she made was another reminder. The safety net she thought I'd hold forever was gone, and she hadn't even started the real fall yet. That night she cornered me in the kitchen, card in hand like it was evidence of her own. "Jack, what's going on with the bank? Why are our cards getting declined?" Her voice carried that edge I'd heard before when she thought she could push me into fixing things. I dried my hands on a towel, met her eyes, and said nothing. Just let the silence stretch until she filled it herself. "Did you forget to pay something? Did you mess up the account?" I kept my face calm, my breathing steady, like I hadn't heard a word. She hated that. Hated when I didn't give her something to grab onto. Finally, I murmured, "I'll handle it." Nothing more. No explanations, no reassurance. Just a wall she couldn't climb. She stormed off, heels echoing through the hall, but I could see it in her shoulders, the first real crack in her confidence. Locking down the money was step one. Step two was making sure that if Emily tried to fight, she'd already lost. I wasn't collecting scraps anymore. I was building a case, brick by brick, the kind no lawyer could punch holes through. I pulled phone records, hours of call logs showing numbers she never explained. I cross-checked dates from the GPS tracker with motel receipts and bank statements. Every line matched like a puzzle snapping into place. Even her social media posts, smiling selfies with Sam and Rachel, lined up perfectly with nights she was checked into a roadside motel with Ryan Mitchell. I printed it all. Screenshots, receipts, records, photos. A manila folder thick enough to snap shut with a thud. In the warehouse, paperwork kept freight moving. In divorce court, paperwork decides who walks away with what. Emily thought she had the upper hand, but the truth was already stacked against her, neat and heavy as steel on a pallet. On my next day off, I stopped by the office supply store. Not for tools or parts, just a plain manila folder, thick enough to hold the weight of everything I'd gathered. At the register, the cashier rang it up without a second thought. To her, it was paper. To me, it was a weapon. At home, I slid the receipts, screenshots, and records inside, each one slipping neatly into place like rounds in a magazine. Then, with a black marker, I wrote a single word across the front in block letters: evidence. I held it for a long moment, the way a man might hold a gun he knows he'll eventually fire. Quiet, heavy, waiting. That folder wasn't just paper, it was insurance. It was leverage. It was the difference between her walking out with half my life and her walking out with nothing but shame. On that garage shelf, under the hum of the light, it waited like a loaded chamber. With money locked down and the folder sealed, there was only one step left: timing. Evidence without timing is just weight. It sits heavy, but goes nowhere. Timing is what makes it strike. I didn't want fireworks, didn't want a blowout fight that ended in slammed doors and broken plates. Explosions are loud, but they fade. I wanted something slower, colder. A collapse so perfect that when it happened, she'd realize every brick had been pulled out from under her long before she noticed the floor giving way. So I waited. I watched her strut out in black dresses and bright lipstick, heels clicking like a countdown. I tracked every motel visit, every late-night return, every overtime shift that was anything but. The day would come when the curtain dropped, when she wouldn't just lose me, she'd lose the version of herself she clung to so tightly. And when that day came, she wouldn't see it coming until it was already over. Some nights, sitting alone in the garage with the folder on the shelf, I'd whisper it to myself like a vow. Explosions end quickly. I wanted a slow collapse. I'd seen explosions in the warehouse, forklift accidents, pallets crashing down, loud, violent, gone in a second. What followed was always the same: dust, cleanup, and people moving on like nothing happened. That wasn't what I wanted. Emily didn't deserve the mercy of something that faded fast. No, I wanted the collapse. A slow buckling of the walls she thought were solid. The kind of fall where you hear the creak, feel the shift, and realize too late there's no stopping it. So I stayed silent. I let her think she was clever. Every kiss on the cheek before girls' night, every smirk she thought I didn't see, it all became another brick I loosened. When her world came down, it wouldn't be with a bang. It would be with a silence she never heard coming. Friday night came, and with it, her ritual. Emily appeared at the top of the stairs in a tight black dress I hadn't seen in years. Not the kind of outfit you wear for wine with girlfriends. The neckline was low, the hem short, the perfume thick enough to linger in the air long after she passed. She didn't dress like that for me anymore. I sat at the kitchen table, boots planted, beer sweating in my hand, watching her glide past with a smirk. "Don't wait up," she said, slipping her heels on by the door. I didn't answer, just took in every detail, her hair pinned high, lipstick flawless, nails freshly painted. A woman preparing for war, but not realizing the battlefield was already mapped against her. Her heels clicked out the door, down the driveway, into the night. I checked my phone. The tracker dot blinked to life. Black dress or not, she wasn't headed for laughter with friends. She was driving straight into the trap. When her taillights disappeared down the street, I stood up from the table and walked into the garage. The board glared back at me. Screenshots, receipts, GPS logs, that one photograph dead center. All the hours of silence, all the patience, had led to this night. I pulled the manila folder from the shelf, thumbed through the pages one last time, then slipped it into a larger envelope I'd labeled in heavy black ink. Truth. On the workbench, my phone buzzed with the tracker dot steady at the Lakeshore Motel. Right on schedule. I checked the locks, poured out the last of my beer, and sat in the living room with the lights low. On the coffee table lay the envelope, and beside it, another phone, the one I'd already used earlier to make a single call. She thought she'd walk back into the same home, the same husband she'd been mocking for months. Tonight, she'd open the door to her reckoning. That afternoon, before Emily even zipped up her black dress, I'd already made my move. A trip to the hardware store, $20, a new set of deadbolts and keys. It didn't take long, just a screwdriver, a little patience, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that by nightfall, her key would be useless. I tested it twice. The lock turned smooth, the bolt sliding in and out without a sound. Then I slipped the spare key into my pocket and tossed the old brass cylinder into the trash bin, buried under rags and oil filters. The front door now answered only to me. The house she thought was her sanctuary, the place she waltzed in and out of with lies on her lips. It no longer belonged to her. When she came back, drunk on perfume and secrets, she'd reach for the handle expecting the world she controlled. Instead, she'd find silence, a locked door, and me, waiting on the other side. Just before midnight, headlights swept across the driveway. I watched from the shadow of the living room curtains as Emily's sedan rolled in. She stepped out carefully, heels clicking against the pavement, dress still flawless like she hadn't a care in the world. She walked up the steps, slipped her key into the lock, and froze. The metal refused her. She twisted harder, rattled the handle, tried again. The smirk she wore hours earlier drained into confusion. She knocked once, soft at first. Then again, louder, fists tapping against the wood. "Jack? The lock's jammed. Open up." Her voice carried that edge of irritation, the tone of someone used to doors swinging wide at her command. But tonight, nothing yielded. Not the lock, not the silence. I sat steady on the couch, envelope on the table beside me, waiting. Her key didn't fit anymore. And for the first time in years, she didn't either. I let her knock a few more times, frustration rising in her voice, before I stood. The house was silent except for the steady hum of the fridge as I crossed the room and pulled the door open. Emily's eyes lit with relief for half a second, until she saw I wasn't alone. Beside me, framed in the doorway's light, stood Thomas Green, her father. His jaw was set like stone, eyes heavy with the kind of disappointment that cuts deeper than rage. I'd called him earlier, sent him everything, the folder, the photos, the truth. Emily staggered back a step, color draining from her face. "Dad, what are you doing here?" Her voice cracked, mascara smudged from the night she thought would stay hidden. Thomas didn't answer right away. He just looked at her like he was staring at a stranger. And in that silence, the weight of everything she'd done finally pressed down on her shoulders. When Emily first saw the shadow beside me, her lips curled into a sly smile. She thought she knew the script, that I'd finally caught on, that Ryan Mitchell was standing in my living room, ready for some ugly showdown. For a flicker of a moment, she even looked proud, like flaunting him in my house would make her feel powerful. But when her eyes adjusted and she saw who it really was, the smile shattered. Not Ryan. Thomas Green, her father. Her. She froze on the porch, mouth open but no sound, the color draining from her face faster than her tears could follow. The man she adored, the one she feared disappointing most, was standing shoulder to shoulder with me, a folder of her betrayal in his hand. Her voice cracked into a whisper, barely audible. "Dad, it's not what it looks like." But it was, and her father's silence said more than any denial could erase. Emily's knees seemed to weaken as she stepped into the doorway, eyes darting between me and her father. Whatever mask she'd worn all night cracked in an instant. The perfect lipstick, the neatly pinned hair, the black dress meant to impress. None of it could hide the panic flooding her face. Her mascara, once flawless, began to smear as tears welled and slipped down, streaking her cheeks in uneven lines. She opened her mouth, but nothing came, just a ragged gasp, like the air had been sucked clean out of her chest. Thomas's gaze didn't waver. Cold, steady, unforgiving. He didn't yell. He didn't need to. The silence pressed harder than any words could. Emily looked at me then, desperate, eyes wide with the pleading of someone drowning. But I stayed still, jaw locked, heart iron. No rage, no mercy, just the quiet that made her realize the show was over. Thomas stepped past her without a word, the weight of his presence filling the room. Emily trailed behind, her heels hesitant on the hardwood, as if every step dragged her deeper into quicksand. In his hand was the envelope I'd given him earlier, evidence scrawled across the front in thick black ink. He walked to the center of the living room, paused at the coffee table, and let it fall. The slap of paper against wood cracked through the silence like a gunshot. Emily flinched as if she'd been struck. The envelope slid open slightly, enough for her to glimpse the contents. Motel receipts, screenshots, photographs she never imagined her father would see. Her hands shook as she reached for it, but Thomas's voice cut across the space, low and steady. "Don't." She froze. Tears spilled freely now, smearing the last traces of her carefully drawn face. The evidence wasn't just paper anymore. It was her undoing, laid bare in her father's shadow. Emily's hands trembled as she stood in the center of the living room, caught between her father's disappointment and the envelope bleeding truth onto the table. Her eyes darted toward me, searching for something, anger, mercy, even an insult she could fight back against. But I gave her nothing. I stayed seated on the couch, arms resting on my knees, gaze locked steady on her. No raised voice, no pointed finger, no dramatic outburst, just silence. And in that silence I could see her unravel. She shifted on her heels, tugged at the strap of her dress, wiped at the mascara smeared across her cheek. Each second without a word from me tightened around her throat like a vice. She finally whispered, "Jack, please, say something." But I didn't, because the truth was louder than anything I could have said. And watching her collapse under the weight of my silence was the justice I'd been waiting for. The room felt like it might split open, yet not a sound carried. No shouting, no slammed doors, just the hum of the fridge, the tick of the wall clock, and her shallow, panicked breaths. Silence. It pressed against her harder than any scream ever could. She shifted, desperate to fill the void. "It's not what you think. I can explain. Please, just listen." Her words tumbled out, weak, brittle, falling flat against walls that refused to echo them back. Thomas sat rigid in his chair, arms crossed, eyes locked on her like a judge waiting for the gavel. I stayed where I was, gaze steady, lips sealed. She broke first, her knees buckled, hands clutching the envelope as if tearing it open would erase what was inside. But she couldn't bring herself to look. The silence wasn't absence. It was judgment. It was the loudest scream she'd ever heard, and it came without a single word. Her legs gave out, and Emily dropped to the floor, the black dress pooling around her like a shadow she couldn't crawl out of. Mascara streaked, hands trembling, she clutched at the envelope but didn't dare open it. Tears soaked the hardwood as she whispered broken fragments. "Dad, please. It was a mistake. I can fix this." Thomas Green stood over her, eyes hollow, jaw clenched. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even touch her. He simply shook his head, slow and deliberate, like a man burying the last piece of faith he'd ever had. "Fix it," he said, his voice low, gravel heavy with disappointment. "You can't fix this." And then he turned. No embrace, no goodbye, no promise of forgiveness, just the sound of his footsteps retreating toward the door. Emily reached out, sobbing, but he never looked back. The slam of the door behind him was the sound of a father severing ties. Thomas's footsteps faded into the night, leaving the house heavy with silence. Emily staggered after him, sobbing, heels scraping against the wood floor until she reached the threshold. I stayed behind, steady, watching. She turned back to me, mascara streaked, lips trembling, arms half raised like she was begging for a lifeline. "Jack, please, don't do this. I can change. I'll stop. Just let me in." I rose from the couch, walked to the doorway, and met her eyes one last time. No anger, no pity, just the clarity of a man who had nothing left to lose. Then I stepped forward, pushed her gently but firmly across the threshold, and closed the door. The latch clicked, the bolt slid home, and her world ended with that sound. Her fists pounded weakly against the wood, cries muffled, breaking apart into the night. But inside, I sat back down, calm at last. For the first time in years, the house felt like mine again. The morning after, I rose before dawn like always. But instead of steel-toed boots and a shift at the warehouse, I put on a clean shirt, tucked the evidence folder under my arm, and drove downtown. The courthouse smelled of paper and dust, the kind of place where lives quietly split in two. I walked up to the clerk's desk, slid the envelope across the counter, and said the words I'd rehearsed in my head for weeks. "I'm here to file for divorce." Inside that folder was everything: receipts, screenshots, motel logs, the photo, even the witness confirmation from Carl at the desk. Each piece was a nail hammered into the coffin of her lies. The clerk stamped it, the sound sharp and final. Just like that, 7 years of marriage became a case number. Walking out, I didn't feel rage. I felt clean. For the first time in months, maybe years, I wasn't carrying her secrets anymore. I was carrying my freedom. When the papers were served, word spread faster than she could contain it. The same friends she'd toasted with on girls' nights, the ones who cheered her selfies and clinked glasses at wine bars, suddenly went quiet. Sam Collins stopped answering her calls. Rachel Miller unfollowed her on social media without a word. Invitations dried up. Group chats moved on without her. Even in the office, the whispers started. People avoiding eye contact. Conversations shifting the second she walked in. Emily had built her image on being the woman others envied, the pretty wife with a steady husband, the perfect house, the nights out. Now the cracks were on display, and envy turned to judgment. I didn't have to lift a finger. Her own circle cut her off, one by one, until she was standing alone in the wreckage she'd made. Silence had taken her reputation, too, and there was nothing left for her to hide behind. When the walls closed in, she turned to the one person she thought would stand by her, Ryan Mitchell. But when she called, the line went straight to voicemail. When she texted, the bubbles never appeared. Days later, the tracker I'd left active on her car showed her parked outside his apartment complex, waiting. He never came down. Ryan wasn't her savior. He was a thrill, a distraction, a man with just enough charm to borrow her loyalty until the cost got too high. And now that her secrets were spilled and her name stained, he'd done what men like him always do: vanished. No note, no goodbye, just silence. I imagined her sitting in that car, makeup smudged, hands gripping the wheel, staring at the door that never opened. The man she gambled her marriage on had cashed out, leaving her to pay the price alone. And for the first time, she finally looked as small as she once thought I was. If losing Ryan gutted her pride, losing her father severed her lifeline. Thomas Green had always been the silent cushion beneath her, paying off credit cards she maxed, slipping her checks when she cried about bills, covering the gaps I never even knew existed. But not anymore. After the night he walked out of my house, Thomas never took her calls again. Weeks later, Emily showed up at his office, mascara smeared, voice cracking in the lobby as she begged to see him. He didn't step out. Instead, his secretary handed her an envelope, her name scratched across the front in his handwriting. Inside was one sentence. "You made your bed, now lie in it." No money, no promise, just the cold finality of a father done carrying her mistakes. That was the nail she couldn't pull. With friends gone, Ryan vanished, and her father's support cut clean. Emily finally stood alone in the ruins she built. By the time the divorce papers were finalized, Emily's world had shrunk to a single, suffocating circle. The friends who once cheered her nights out were gone. Ryan had disappeared like smoke in the wind. Her father's silence was colder than any courtroom verdict. She rented a small apartment on the edge of town, one bedroom with peeling paint and a view of the parking lot. No wine nights, no lavish shopping trips, no safety net waiting in the wings, just her and the quiet. Neighbors said they saw her sometimes on the balcony, cigarette glowing, phone in hand but never ringing. The woman who once strutted out in black dresses now shuffled to the mailbox in sweats, hair tied back, eyes hollow. She had gambled everything, marriage, family, reputation, for a thrill that vanished the second it cost too much. And now, with nothing left, Emily Turner was living the kind of silence she used to mock. When the dust settled, I was still standing where I'd always been, steady, solid, unshaken. The court granted me the house, the accounts, the savings I'd built with years of calloused hands and 12-hour shifts. She left with nothing but the clothes she packed in a single suitcase. The mortgage still had my name on it. The truck keys still jingled on my belt loop. The paycheck still hit my account every Friday morning. What I'd earned through sweat and silence remained untouched, protected by the very evidence she had handed me with her arrogance. Walking through the halls of the house, I felt the difference. The air was lighter without her perfume covering lies, the walls steadier without her laughter masking secrets. I hadn't just survived, I'd kept the foundation intact. She gambled on betrayal, I bet on patience, and patience made sure that when the smoke cleared, I was still the one holding everything that mattered. Even at work, there was no refuge. The same colleagues who once gushed about her perfect marriage now avoided her in the break room. Whispers filled the hallways when she passed, eyes flicking to the floor, then back to her with thinly veiled judgment. Sam Collins, once her loudest defender, no longer saved her a seat at lunch. Rachel Miller wouldn't meet her eyes during meetings. Even new hires had heard the story. Dallas offices have a way of carrying gossip faster than any memo. Emily sat at her desk with a forced smile, tapping her keyboard like nothing had changed, but she could feel it. The weight of those stares. The silent verdict passed every time someone shifted away from her in the elevator. Her reputation wasn't just gone, it was inverted. The woman people envied had become the cautionary tale whispered over coffee. And unlike perfume, shame doesn't wash off before 9 a.m. The first mornings alone were strange, almost too quiet. No clatter of heels on the hardwood, no perfume lingering in the kitchen, no forced smiles across the breakfast table. Just me, black coffee, and sunlight spilling through windows that finally felt honest again. I started small, cleaning the garage, fixing the squeaky step she always ignored, cooking meals without worrying if they'd meet her standards. Each task was ordinary, but it carried a weight I hadn't felt in years. Freedom doesn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it comes with the simple peace of knowing no one is lying in your bed. At work, the guys noticed. I carried myself straighter, laughed easier, even stayed late without that knot in my chest. The house felt lighter, my shoulders freer. Emily's absence wasn't a wound anymore. It was space, room to rebuild, room to breathe. And with every passing day, I realized I hadn't lost anything. I'd reclaimed everything. A week after the papers were signed, I found myself at a roadside diner just outside Dallas. The kind with chipped mugs, neon lights buzzing, and waitresses who know when to talk and when to leave you be. I slid into a booth by the window, ordered black coffee and eggs, and watched the first light of dawn crawl across the horizon. For the first time in years, my chest wasn't tight. The world wasn't heavy. There was no phone vibrating with lies, no perfume masking secrets, no clock ticking down to another late-night excuse. Just the steady hum of the diner and the sunrise breaking clean over the highway. I stirred my coffee, took a sip, and let the warmth settle. Freedom didn't feel like fireworks. It felt like this: a quiet booth, an honest morning, and the knowledge that I'd outlasted the storm without ever raising my voice. She thought I was small. She mistook my silence for blindness, my calm for weakness. But the truth was simpler, sharper. Control was always mine. Revenge isn't rage. Rage burns fast, leaves only smoke. Revenge is patience. It's the slow build, the quiet stacking of evidence, the discipline to wait until every card is in your hand. And patience. Patience is bigger than anything she could imagine. I didn't need to shout, didn't need to break. All I had to do was hold steady while her own lies unraveled around her. In the end, she lost the house, the money, the respect of her friends, the love of her father, and even the man she gambled it all for. And me? I walked away clean. One last look at the house I kept, one deep breath, and I closed the door behind me. Not an ending, a beginning. If you thought this was insane, wait until the next story. Subscribe.